The kind of title of this is Reimagining Saintliness, Teresa Deevy and the Catholic Imagination. To me, Teresa Deevy is a conundrum. She's a devout Catholic. She's born into a deeply Irish Catholic family. She's convent educated. She's a daily communicant throughout her life, a person for whom her life and the practice of her faith are thoroughly enmeshed. But she's also an artist, a maker and a thinker, who sees quite clearly the limits, the prejudices, and the abuses of the church, particularly with regard to the limitations that it places upon women. And she uses her art and the stage, in fact, as a platform from which to critique the church. In fact, the stage lends Deevy the power and the source of authority that the church does not give her. In this regard, Deevy represents the enlightened contemporary Catholic of her time, who chafes against the strictures of the church, as does Dorothy Day, who around this time, 1933, is founding the Catholic Worker and being a bit of a stone in the shoe of the New York Archdiocese. She's going to be a saint now, of course. This is what happens, right? And Thomas Merton, of course, who enters the monastery in 1941 and then gradually finds that he's inside of a church that doesn't really practice justice in the way that it should to all of its members. So she's very much in step with the enlightened Catholics of her own era, but she's also in step with the enlightened Catholics of our era as well, an era that decries an all-male clergy and hierarchy with its refusal even to consider the possibilities of female priesthood, those who object to the heavy yoke that is placed particularly on the shoulders of women through its teachings on contraception, those who chafe against the church's daily disrespect and pervasive attitude of condescension towards women, and yet all of these people, or many of these people, these thoughtful Catholics, still remain within the church, critiquing it from inside rather than leaving it behind. Deevy's Catholicism then, if non-traditional, is very familiar to us. I'm reminded of two quotations. One is from Romano Guardini, who was beloved both by Dorothy Day and by Flannery O'Connor, two American Catholic writers who were of Irish descent, obviously. He says this about the church: "The church is the cross on which Christ is always crucified. One cannot separate Christ from his bloody, painful church. Hence, one must live in a state of permanent dissatisfaction with the church." And then, even more subversive are these words that are ascribed to St. Augustine. When he speaks of the church, he says, "She may be a whore, but she's my mother." Seen in this way, Deevy is a Catholic artist in the spirit of her own time and also in the spirit of ours. So I'd like to explore some of the ways in which her critique of Catholicism manifests itself in the play that we've just seen. Since artists traffic in particulars and not in abstraction, it's Deevy's plot, characters, language, and themes where we see her exploring the possibilities of the Catholic imagination as a means of liberating the church and its people. It might be helpful to say a few words about this idea of the Catholic imagination that I've mentioned. There's been a lot of ink that's been spilled on this topic, but I think I can give a quick definition and a few characteristics. A Catholic imagination is one that has been shaped, influenced, and informed in some way by exposure to Catholic teaching, worship, and formation. And that formation may be spiritual, intellectual, or cultural in nature, and usually is some combination of all of those. The worldview of a Catholic writer or artist is most likely going to engage in some way the central teachings of the church, and we certainly saw this in this play this evening. The Judeo-Christian mythos of the fall and the redemption of humankind through grace, the incarnation as a one-time and yet ongoing event, the reality of sin and the saving power of the sacraments, the participation in the community of saints, and the ongoing presence of God even in the broken world and even in the flawed people that populate that world. The Catholic artist also has access to a language that is related to these teachings and to the Catholic worldview. It's a language that is reflective of the complexity of the Catholic vision, and it includes words that have to do with sacramental practice, with morality, with Catholic attitudes towards time and the measurement of time. It's so interesting the way that Amelia is always coming and going according to those bells knelling outside, whether it's the Angelus, whether it's the stations. She's constantly running her life really according to liturgical time. And then also with history as seen through the eyes of the Catholic Church. Words having to do with martyrdom, apostasy, and sainthood come to mind. Teresa Deevy has access to all of this language, as her contemporary Irish Catholic audience did, and she makes rich use of it in Katie Roche. But unlike the evangelical or the devotional writer who invokes language in order to teach the articles of faith or to encourage appreciation of it, Deevy invokes this language in order to call aspects of the faith and the church into question. And this is one of the kind of keynotes of my remarks. Catholic artists like Deevy actually perform to the church, for the church rather, a function that's very similar to the ones that saints have traditionally performed. They challenge the church from within, they call her out on her excesses, and they challenge her to live up to the high standards that have been set forth by their founder, Christ. It's been said that saints are sent to prick and goad the church into becoming what it was meant to be. And the same might be said of Catholic writers. I say this in the full knowledge that I, too, am a Catholic writer, so I think I'm sort of thinking as a practitioner as well as a one who enjoys the art of other Catholic writers. Deevy accomplishes this in a number of ways. One of the ways she does this is by incorporating a wild kind of semi-pagan mysticism into the play and into the character of Katie Roche in particular. Katie, too, is a would-be pious Catholic. The play opens with her considering a religious vocation. She wants to be a saint, as she says, to save my soul and to more than save it. But she knows that the convent isn't the right place for her. She is too alive, too vital for that kind of life, and she's unwilling to suppress her sexual energy because she somehow senses that there is goodness in that and not just sin, as the church would have it. This celebration of feminine sexuality is deep, of course, in Irish pagan lore, and the play alludes to this in its setting. It's set around the time of Lunasa, the fall festival, the fall harvest feast, and in Katie's love of the dance festivities held at the Hill of Knock, a site that suggests both pagan and Christian celebration, and I'll say more about that in a couple of minutes. Thus, Deevy's Catholic imagination is syncretic. It broadens the definition of religion itself, of the sacred, and it expands the possibilities for sainthood. I'd also like to say a few words about Deevy as a Catholic writer in her time and place, the church and its relationship to popular culture, which has always been a complicated one, but certainly during Deevy's time this was true. She's writing her plays in Ireland, as we now know, during the 1930s, a time and circumstance that in many ways defines the era of the hothouse culture of pre-Vatican II Catholicism. The Catholic Church, particularly in Europe and America, was insular. It was inward-looking and trying in vain to protect Catholics from the onslaught of secularism and modernity. This is 30 years before the publication of Gaudium et Spes in 1964, which was the first encyclical produced by the Second Vatican Council, whose theme is the Church in the modern world. The theme of that document is inevitably that the church must be involved in world affairs, that the dictates of Christ require all Catholics and all Christians to essentially go global in their work and in their vision, to read the signs of the times and figure out its role. In contrast to the church that is to be in the 1960s, or the hopefully to be, the church of Katie Roche's time is still functioning under the illusion of absolute authority and the delusion of changelessness. There is no other viable way of seeing things. There's no resisting or battling against it because they always have been and always will be this way. There is yet no mythos of progress. That belongs to the realm of science and social science. The church has not acknowledged yet that it will change. In addition, the church of Katie Roche's time, as many of us may remember, is pretty terrifying. The stakes of disobedience are extremely high. The sword of Damocles that is suspended over the head of every Catholic is the certainty of hell, or at the very least purgatory, the common destination of Catholics who do not embrace and live according to church teaching. The church has not yet adopted the kinder, gentler view that some moral decisions are a matter of conscience, or admitted the possibility that there is more than one road to God. The rules on proper behavior were also much more strict, especially when it came to sexual matters, as is evident in the play. The requirements for being Catholic were also much more strict as well. Most notable among these is a separation between the world and secular culture, an apartness and a purity, cultural as well as sexual, that Catholics were supposed to maintain. And at one point early in the play, Reuben emphasizes this by talking about Christ as being out of the world and entirely against the world, a teaching that Katie finds very difficult to be able to take seriously. this is a kind of amounts to a sort of ghettoization of the Catholic writer and thinker, and it has particularly valence for a writer like Teresa Deevy. This is an era when the Index, which was first founded in the 16th century, is still operational. The Index, as many people here I'm sure know, listed the books that Catholics were not permitted to read for fear that they might endanger their faith. Other forms of literary entertainment were indicted as well during this period. In the spirit of the era, the National League of Decency had been founded in the United States in 1933 in an effort to combat what was seen as growing obscenity and moral laxity that was evident in films. The judgments of such bodies were welcomed by the Church. In fact, in solidarity with this, in 1946, Pope Pius XI published his encyclical on the motion picture, which is extremely interesting reading, by the way, in which he says, "Moving pictures are an evil worse than books." As one might imagine, plays were also of concern, both to the church police and also to the secular guardians of culture and decency in Ireland. The Censorship Board, which issued acts of prohibition forbidding Irish people access to texts that might endanger their morals. It has been said that Ireland in the 1930s and the 40s, in that era, the gap between the church and the educated Catholic was never broader. So in Deevy's mind, as in the minds of most educated Catholics in Ireland during this time, the church imposed limitations on its people in nearly every way: spiritually, physically, intellectually, socially, sexually, vocationally, all ways. So Deevy's work raises some interesting questions about Catholicism. First, what might we ask then is salvageable? What portion of the church might one lay claim to and try to isolate and liberate from the rest of it? And how can art accomplish that end, in particular plays?